If you want to learn music theory, just know that traditional notation has problems because it totally distorts music theory beyond recognition. So if you study notation, you will struggle, and here's why. All of music theory is based on three fundamental patterns. The chromatic scale, which is the 12 basic notes of music in sequence. Then there's the major scale, like this C major scale, which is a subset of the chromatic scale built from whole step and half step intervals that can start on any of the 12 notes. And the third essential pattern is the circle of fifths, which is just a rearrangement of the chromatic scale with all of the notes in harmonic sequence. And when you apply color, it's easier to see how all of these patterns relate. Again, the chromatic scale is just the 12 notes in music. The major scale is formed by playing a special pattern of whole step and half step intervals that also happen to form a big daisy chain pattern called the circle of fifths, where every fifth note in this ring is harmonically related. And together, these three patterns, the chromatic scale, the major scale, and the circle of fifths, form the holy trinity of music, where each is simply a reincarnation of the others, and where each pattern is inherently cyclical, forming an endless loop. But in traditional notation, this cyclical nature is lost because musical space gets distorted. The depiction of notes and intervals becomes warped. Music theory, in its purest form, is about the space or relationships between pitches, which are infinite and cyclical, as shown here, where the notes and intervals of music form their natural patterns within the dimensions of audible space. But in traditional notation, which illustrates both pitch and rhythm together, or space and time on the same page, the appearance of musical space changes to accommodate the depiction of time, where time, or rhythm, is shown moving from left to right along the x-axis of notation, and space, or pitch, is confined to the vertical y-axis of the staves. And this collapse of musical space distorts the true cyclical nature of music theory, so it can be difficult, if not impossible, to understand even the most basic patterns. For example, here's the chromatic scale as it really is, but when seen through the distorted lens of music notation, this is what it looks like. And again, here's the major scale, the C major scale, for example, as it actually is. But when run through the meat grinder of notation, it gets stretched and warped like this. And finally, here's the circle of fifths in its cyclical and symmetrical state that becomes unrecognizable when seen through the symbols of notation. Now, the colors help us see the effect of this distortion in notation, how the cyclical patterns get squeezed and shifted. But in true traditional notation, where every note is shown as a uniform black dot, the real nature of these patterns is even more opaque, more hidden. So if you didn't know about this distortion in the first place, you wouldn't know how it's warping your view of theory and really tripping you up. So if you want to understand music theory for songwriting, you can study theory itself or get sidetracked and frustrated looking at it through the broken lens of traditional notation.